Actually, did not want to start recording yet. Whoops. We'll get started officially on 6.1. Hi, good morning. It started officially on 6.1 in about a minute. Thank you. On the thread for the day, let me pull it up real quick. Hold on, I lost my spot. There we go. Hi, good morning. Thank you. All right, so on our thread for the day, I've added a couple extra resources attached to our plan for this Tuesday. There we are. Today's Ugly Sweater Day, by the way. If you're thank you for participating in Spirit Week if you are going ugly sweater direction. We're going to talk about 6.1 and then you're going to have some work time. And your challenge for today, I've decided to add, if you get bored or you finish up your site earlier, you can add, I'm going to provide you a challenge, applying whatever the concept is that we're talking about. This is totally optional. But if you want some extra practice with the new thing that I'm showing you, you can find a way to create a simple web page, just any basic HTML, any basic style sheet that scales nicely from desktop to mobile. But I've put a bunch of different links here about how you can use more advanced media queries, how you can take advantage of the available space, a reference document for media queries, and a guide to designing your pages mobile first so that they look great on a phone first and then a desktop or other larger screen later on, that you have options there. And here's another walkthrough on how to write media queries in CSS, just in case you ever need one. And with all that being said, it's 8:05. We're live officially. So you guys' phones should be put away, please. Distracting tabs closed, at least one headphone out, so I know you can hear me. I'm going to trust you using your headphones to listen to me through Zoom. But either way, that's what we're doing today. All right, so 6.1, if you remember yesterday, we did all of our root folder setup. We have each of these individual CSS pages with some extra specific conditions that need to be met before we do anything. Or that the client is looking, very specific conditions the client's looking for. And we can do that using media queries. So if you guys want to open up your VS codes and your root folders from the earlier this week that we set up. All right, that was me experimenting, so don't look at that yet. Don't look, I'll show you how to do that. Okay, let's go to First Period Web Design and into our Unit 6 subfolder. If you weren't here, hi, good morning. If you weren't here earlier this week, we just did a Unit 6 subfolder setup and did multiple style sheets for a single HTML, linked them all here. That video is available in the agenda from yesterday, so you can check out what we did so that you have that reference for what we're working with today. In the meantime, most of us should be at this point where we have div class of blue, div class of yellow, and div class of BW, which is a little bit of CSS on each of those pages to make it happen. So that it looks, if I go live real quick, we should be looking something like this right now. Just a little bit of extra sizing, a little bit of yellow div background, and then a border around our black and white part. Okay, so our client is specifically looking for 2x font, white colored on a blue background. So those are the three pieces of CSS that have not changed. Those are the ones that we're used to. So I'm going to quickly go to my div.blue style sheet. And then we already have the font size of 200%, but we just need to change the background color and the regular color. So I'm going to do that real fast. This is all stuff that you've done before, so you know how to set colors and background colors and things. So I'm not going to go into too much detail. But if we set the background color to blue and the color to white, if we go back to my output, you can see that we have a nice blue div box that's going to be fully full-sized when we need it to, or sorry, 200% font, blue background, whatever. We're going to repeat this process for the other two CSS requirements, ignoring the less than for this at this point. But we have normal sized red text on a yellow background. So it's a pretty similar process. Going to go to yellow style. We've already got background set to yellow, but we just need to set the regular color to red. Just like we did on the other div. Should look something like this. You can see a little highlighted yellow div situation happening here. And then the black and white div, we don't actually really need to change anything technically because this is only specific to a media query that happens when the page is printed. So we're just going to leave the border on there for now. And that will change once we start adding the media queries. So if your output is looking like this, then this is the CSS that we're used to, just setting with classes, properties, selectors, all that fun stuff. Now let's make it a little bit more responsive. Let's make it adjust dependent on the size of our viewport here. We're going to do that by using media queries and the extra condition of min width and max width. So what I want you to keep in mind, since we're going to start on the blue style, this is what our CSS container is looking, or that's what our client's looking for. But the client is also looking for if the page is 800 pixels or more wide. So this is the media query portion where we're going to move our regular CSS into and allow our page to respond to more user input. So the syntax of a media query, the way that the grammatical rules that the media query is always going to follow is you're always going to start with @media. And I'm going to make this a little diagram that we'll fill in just a second so you can have like a comment version of that to reference later on. So @media becomes your first thing that you're going to write here. It's going to get mad until we finish out all the required pieces. There are three main types of media that we're going to be using that are going to directly follow the @. That's either screen or print or speech. Those are the three main types of media. So we have media type equals screen, print, or speech. Okay, so you have to choose one, or you could choose all technically. But by leaving the type blank, it's going to set it to all by default. When you want specific things to happen based on specific conditions, you need to actually set what those specific conditions are. So most of the time, you're going to be using screen. Print is for when you print the page or turn it into a PDF, and speech is for accessibility. If your end user has a screen reader or another type of accessibility option, you can use a media query to add extra information or change the way that the site appears or something of that nature. So this is your first step, is writing @media and then setting a specific type. The next step, and then I'll put this all in a comment so you can reference it later. The next step is to set your and property. So there's a lot of different options here. Most frequently, you're going to be using and, but there's also or, neither, or none. There's a bunch of them, and some of them are kind of like, what's that word? Counterproductive, where they don't really work in the way that you'd expect. Most of the time, you're going to be using and. I've added some references later on so that you can check out the other options, but after your media type becomes and. After and comes parentheses, and then inside of these parentheses is an additional condition like min width or max width. Like min dash width or max dash width. All right. So that's the main line. This is quite a bit longer than actual media queries tend to be because this is breaking down all of the options that you can work with here. But you're going to start with @media, set your media type, and then add an and with parentheses. And the additional conditions typically are minimum width of your viewport screen and maximum width of your viewport screen. After all that, this functions very similarly to your regular CSS selector, where it's focusing on the condition as compared to the HTML element. So what we do next is add a curly bracket and then hit enter. We have our media query condition established, and now we write regular CSS inside of this media query. So you have a selector. It's going to be specific to your HTML document. Inside of that selector, you have a property that you're changing, property, and then you have a value that you're setting it to, and you can set as many of these as you need. So property and value, etc. All right, so media queries act like a container for regular CSS. The only thing that really changes is they become kind of like a doorway or kind of like a key, a certain key that needs to be unlocked before the door of the CSS that's inside happens to them. So I'm going to comment all this out so that it stops being mad at me. we're going to write our media query for div.blue. Okay, so min width and max width are all related to viewport size. Viewport's another name for your window. It's another name for the size of your screen. This Canvas page, for example, is taking up the entirety of my viewport. If I were to hold this and hold Windows key and arrow, snap it to the side, now it's taking up 50% of my viewport, right? Whenever I'm talking about viewport, I mean the window of your browser. So when I mention viewport, check that, and that's going to be your VW and your VH properties specifically. Okay, so our media query that we need to write here is related to the viewport. And since a viewport is a screen, that is the media type that you're going to set. So we're going to start with @media. This is the one that's actually going to be relevant to the div.blue. We're going to set the @media to be screen like this, because we're using a screen to interact with this specific condition. Next, we have a number here. We have 800 pixels. And there's a very important distinction I want you guys to keep in mind, this or more. Or more means that the 800 pixels is the starting point of where the CSS is supposed to happen, depending on a variety of different screens. So whenever you see or more, I want you to think of that as the starting point, which is going to be min width. That's our and property. Anything that says or more, or that you want to think of as a pixel number where your CSS begins to happen, where whatever CSS you have written inside of your condition will start occurring, that's going to be min width. So we're going to go into our @media screen here. We're still on 6.1 bluestyle.css. Then we're going to add an and condition with a parentheses and set the min-width to be, if I can spell it, min-width to be 800 px. Now, it's tempting to want to put a semicolon after the px here, like normal CSS. Don't do that. I don't know why they decided to be inconsistent, but when you're putting it in an and condition, you do not need a semicolon after the actual number that you're setting it to. What's up?
Maybe it's because it's a small bracket.
Maybe, yeah, it's like a separate sort of situation. So this is our condition. If our user is using a screen, which hopefully they are, if they're interpreting HTML, unless they have a direct beam into the server with their brain. If they're using a screen, and that screen has a minimum width of 800 pixels, we're going to curly bracket. Inside of this curly bracket is where we apply the CSS that the client is looking for specifically. So what we can do, I'm going to comment out this div.blue. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to Control-C or copy that on the div.blue. Hit tab so that we're nested inside of our media container here, our media query container here. Control-V, just normal CSS behaving inside of the media screen like this. And now I'm going to go back over here and comment this out. You should be looking something like this, where we have our media query declared, our type of media, which is screen, and our additional condition, our minimum width, our starting point being 800 pixels. I'm going to add a little note here, min-width equals starting point. And then I'm going to comment that out with Control ? Like this. Control S to save. Let's go back to our output. So before I go back to our output, my monitor, I actually don't know how wide my monitor is. Let me pull up this tool I have real quick. I have a screen ruler. So where is my screen ruler? There we go. All right, let's see how wide this monitor is. Come on. Just thinking about it. There we go. All right, so this monitor, if I go down here, in theory, is 1280 pixels wide. So since we have a starting point of 800 pixels, we have a minimum width allowed of 800 pixels. Before I go back to the output, do you guys think yes or no that this CSS is going to apply? No, I heard some no's. Okay. Anybody think that it will apply? It will apply. Some people are saying, well, let's find out. So let me turn off my screen ruler.
Mine didn't work.
Okay, so we go here, go to our output. You can see that the CSS has begun applying because our screen size is 800 pixels or more. So if I were to reduce my screen size, right, we're still 800 pixels. Actually, I wonder if I can pull up screen. I mean, pull that ruler back up. Hold on. That was really useful. There we go. All right, so you can see my viewport is 1123 pixels. If I resize that, Let me close out of here. Resize that till about, just keep going smaller, keep going smaller. You can tell when we go below 800 pixels because the CSS will turn off. The media query is no longer met. So if I go back to my screen ruler, I wish I don't have a keystroke for this, so you just have to stall for time. Come on, screen ruler.
What happened?
We're waiting. I don't have. Give me my ruler. Yeah, we could do that too. Okay, here we go. So if I take my screen ruler, we are less than 800 pixels wide. See, we're 790 by 794. The condition of minimum width is no longer met. The starting point has not been reached, so the CSS inside of the container, inside of the query, is not going to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, with that in mind, if min width is the starting point, what does that make max width? If it's the opposite, it's the ending point. Exactly. It is the ending point where your CSS stops happening as compared to starts happening. Why is that relevant? You may be curious. Well, your client is looking for normal size red text on a yellow background when the page is less than 800 pixels wide. So now, 1 second, Grace. We're gonna go to our yellow style and repeat the same process. Okay, you had a question.
Is it like the same text?
Like,
It's like
Same font?
only the style change and then like the text and stuff is like the same font or something.
like, you mean on the HTML?
What's like the whole website thing or like this like one?
Oh, it's just specific to my div classes. You can set it to be, like on blue style, I have div.blue as my regular selector. So it's this media query only affects the elements divs with a class of blue. You can set this to be body or HTML and it will affect your entire page. It's just dependent on what selector you put inside of the bracket or inside of the media query here.
Okay.
So we're gonna go to yellow style. Here's the conditional CSS that our client's looking for. I want you guys to help me write this media query for max width as compared to min width. So with the media query, what do I start with? At media, okay. What comes next? Screen is what? The type of media, the name of the media, what's that called? The type, exactly. Media screen is gonna be our type. Okay, so there's my first set of conditions, but my CSS is not super stoked on that, if you can tell right down here. What do I need next? And what? We got max dash width, okay. And we're gonna set that max width to be 800 px. Do I need a semicolon after my max width value? No, you would think so, but you don't actually. Okay, so here's our media query. Here's our condition that needs to be met before any specific CSS happens. So we're gonna go curly bracket, enter, and then just write normal CSS in here, which we've already written up here with div.yellow. So if I highlight this, Control C, Control V, that inside of my media query container, I can comment this out because I've already written that and I just want to kind of toggle it off in the meantime. So now you will see that yellow div has gone back to the normal default until we reach a screen size that is 800 pixels or less. So you can tell the exact edge where that's 800 pixels right there, because you can see where my media queries start affecting one another. So this is 801 pixels, because if we look at our blue style, min width is our starting point. So this is at least 800 pixels or larger. If I full screen, blue div will maintain. Okay. The opposite is also true. If we go to yellow style with max width, hold on, let me make a little comment here. Max dash width equals CSS ending point. And that's how I want you guys to keep these two specific media query things in mind when you're thinking about how to create something called breakpoints, which we'll work on another time, not specific to 6.1. Okay, so max width is our ending point. Min width is our starting point. Now if we go back here, resize our viewport. Once we hit less than 800 pixels, the media query is going to apply. We want to double check just for posterity's sake. Oh, there's my screen roll. Let's sit up. Look, we are less than 800 pixels wide, 785 pixels wide total. So that's our first two explorations with media queries. Okay. Now we need to talk about print. That's the third and final thing that our client's looking for exercise number 1. So we full screen this here. We have black text on a white background when the page is printed. So that's why I had you make 3 separate CSS files, because we're going to be doing 3 separate media queries, all connected back to one single HTML. So if we go to BW style, the only thing we have on there currently is this border to make our div.bw actually appear, so we can see what we're working with here. We're going to write a media query. We're going to start with @media, but instead of setting it to screen, because we're not technically trying to do anything specific for the screen here, we're only changing the way that the document prints. So print can mean literally being sent to a printer, or it can mean being converted into a PDF file. But print is another media type that's going to allow you to create conditions that when certain things happen on your page, certain other things happen on your page. Okay, this one, print does not require an and condition. You could add an and condition if you really want to maybe make a specific paper style or like screen size, or I don't know exactly, but media print is one of the ones that you can leave on its own. So if I'm trying to change, because we have just media print is our entire media query for when the page gets printed. If I'm trying to change my entire HTML document from all this regular styling to black text on a white background, back to the default, which tag out of all of these, or which container, should I focus on as my selector? Remember, the head is invisible. This is the web page brain. I heard some whisperings. What are you guys thinking? What should be my HTML select or my CSS selector to affect the entire page? Body, exactly. Okay, so now we're gonna go to BW style, and we're gonna set the selector of body or comma HTML for extra what's called parity, P-A-R-I-T-Y instead of the Weird Al version, parody. By adding these 2 selectors, I'm able to highlight the entirety of my page as it's connected by the CSS. So this is only going to affect the body and the HTML of the HTML file that it's attached to, that it's Zelda linked to. So then we're going to go curly bracket. How would I change background color? You guys better know this. Crazy.
Or background.
Or just background, but I'm going to go extra specific so I can figure out what I'm talking about later on. Okay, we're going to set that background color to white. Now this seems a little strange setting it to a default because it's a default. It should just apply normally. We do this just so we're extra sure that the print media query is functional and it goes for the effect that we're looking for. So, and then the next thing, I'll just set the regular text color to be black, or all the elements text color to be black. Geez, like this. Okay, Control S to save that. I'm going to comment this out real quick so you can actually see how it works. So just Control question mark to toggle that off. We go back to our output. You can see that the other media queries are still functional. Blue div is definitely blue. Definitely got some pixel action happening here. So if I were to print this in black and white, it would just be, you know, white text on a black bar. So what you can do to check, make sure that your print media query is working. Mine is not currently because it's turned off. If I right click or I middle finger click inside of my viewport, and then I go down to, it's not here, of course. I have a print option right up here, or you can hold Control and press P. You can see that it did not do what I needed it to do, of course. But let me try something here. Let's turn this query back on, and let's set the font size to something crazy like 500%. Make it 5 times larger. Okay, go back to our output. Cancel, Control P that. There we go. So now our media print query is working, putting 1 div or a div and a half on each of these pages. You can select your printer like normal, or you can do print to PDF if you really want to save this document here. But the media print query, you want to focus on the entire body or the entire HTML so that it affects the page and makes it more legible if you ever needed to print that page. So if I were to go to, right, we're back to blue div. Let's see if it wants to No, okay, it's working. So the font size, I'm gonna set the font size to 100% just to be safe. That's one of the things that is just kind of, this version is not used very frequently, for full honesty, setting a media query to print. At least in this fashion, setting it back to default. Because as you guys have seen a couple times now, the HTML is smart enough to know to turn off the CSS when I go to print it. But if you want to be extra sure, or you want to make something crazy happen when the page is printed, like if we flip this, for example, set the background color to black and the regular text color to white, you go to our output, fingers crossed this works this time. No, of course not. That would be too easy. But just pretend that it worked, because you can set media queries to print something specific and change the way things look in that way. So we'll set this back to that. Your CSS should look something like this for exercise 1. Does anybody have any questions on exercise 1? I can do a quick check. Here's my media query for blue style. You might want to take notes of the min width and the media query setup process, just so you don't have to reference this video every time. Okay. I'm gonna go to yellow style. So check blue style against this. Okay, I'm gonna work my way over to yellow style. Check your yellow style against this. You do not need the comments talking about min or max width, but I like to leave notes because I forget. I had to make sure I knew what I was talking about this morning. So I like to leave little notes for myself in the future. Okay, check your media query, check your div.yellow property. And then we're gonna go to black and white style for prints. Remember, that's the one where we do not need an and condition typically. I'm gonna add this border here so that it just highlights the whole body in a container. You don't need to do the border, but I would like to do the border. So
Wait, what's the border?
the border is just for funsies. So now when I go to print, it's still not working. Let me try refreshing. Yeah, that's weird. I'm gonna go live once again because this print query, it worked when I tested it earlier. Oh shoot, I ran CSS. Classic.
Wait,
It's
do we
blast.
have to have the border thing?
Hmm?
Are we supposed to comment down the top part?
I did, yes, because we only want the CSS to happen when certain conditions are
Yeah,
met.
the border and then.
I want to see if border works real quick because it's not behaving the way that I need it to. Okay, so here's our regular query. Let me print this. Maybe it'll work better on Chrome. Firefox is just being mean. Okay, I'm just debugging at this point. Okay, so here we are with our blue div. If I go print, yeah, if you're using Chrome, if you right click, you have a print option. There we go. Now my print query works. Okay, so Firefox is just being mean this morning. Okay, so you can see that my print query, oh my goodness, get rid of all these. My print query that sets the background color to white, color to black, font size 100, and adds a border. It adds it to the entirety of the HTML here. Let me see if I can zoom in. Oh, I might have just printed that web page. We're gonna find out. Okay, let me zoom in. You can see that it's putting a border around the body, which contains the 3 divs, and a border around the HTML, which contains everything, naturally. You do not need the border, but if you want to make sure that your print query is working, you can add that border and go from there. Okay, so there's another exercise that we'll quickly go through because it only really has one media query. We need a red, green, and blue square using divs to display side by side. And then when a page hits a certain breakpoint, like on the exercise number 1, we're going to change the display of those squares as compared to just their color. So shifting gears to exercise number 2, I'm going to add a little H1 right here for exercise 1. Oh, I got the hiccups. Perfect timing. Okay, then after these divs, I'm going to add an HR, horizontal rule here. Okay. Underneath my HR, I'm going to add 3 divs, div.red, hit enter. This is red. Okay. Div.rg is green, hit enter. This is green. And then same thing, div.blue, and then hit enter. And then I'll have 3 divs set to a class of red, green, and blue respectively. I go back to my output here. Let's see what we're working with. This should be exercise.
For the first one, like, we're doing, not really, like the other one, like, can we have the whole page, so like the blue?
Yeah, you can make it the whole page. The client's specifically asking for one thing, but I'm willing to be flexible. Okay, so I'm gonna add an H1 under here for exercise 2. We're on a time crunch. We got 9 minutes left, and then I'll help you guys one-on-one. You can see some conflict though with div class of blue for blue div and div class of blue for blue box. So I'm gonna add a little more specifics. This div has a class of blue and an ID of box. And I'm gonna add that ID of box to each of my divs here, like this. So each one has a class color and an ID of box. So now when I go back here and refresh, it's still being mean. Okay, let me try something. Let me go to blue style. So I'm gonna set my selector to be div with a class of box and a, wait, no, that's not right. Sorry. With a class of blue and an ID of box. So dot blue, hashtag box.
We can do that?
We'll find out. I haven't tried. We're gonna set the color to be background color to white. And then we're gonna set the font size to be something crazy because I want to make sure that it works. So font size 5,000%. Okay, refresh that. Go back to Chrome. Okay, yep, it's working. There's blue box, barely hidden in the shadows. It's there. Okay, cool. So to do your CSS for the second exercise, you need a class and an ID. But since the ID is the same across all 3 of these divs, the only reason you can do that is because they have a different class that creates the distinction here. So I'm going to not make it 5,000% anymore if I go into blue style.
Can you go back to the H0?
In just a second. Let me get rid of that and get rid of that. Actually, I'm just gonna get rid of this whole thing. We're gonna start over. Okay, Control S. Here's the HTML. Here's how your 3 classes and IDs should be looking. We're gonna write a media query that changes their display because divs are blocks by default, right? We're gonna change their display to be inline to start off instead of block. Now, there's a couple ways that you can approach this. One of them is taking advantage of div block nature. They're already going to be blocks by default, so you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Or, so when you're, let me actually go somewhere with that. By not reinventing the wheel, when the page is less than 800 pixels, you just need to take the media query off because then they'll start displaying as blocks again. Or you can set them to inline and then write another query that changes them to be block level. We'll do a couple options here. So we have red, green, and blue squares side by side. I'm gonna do it all. I'm actually gonna make a new style sheet. So I'm gonna go to the style subfolder and create a new file for 6.1 ex2 style .css, hit enter. And that means we'll need to relink it, or we need to link this 4th version or this 4th style sheet to our page here. So I'm gonna go link, hit enter, inside of the href style subfolder, and then x2 style, and then type equals text/css, just normal old HTML, Zelda link tags. And then we're gonna go into ex2 style. And this is where we're gonna set the color rule for each of our divs, as well as the query that changes everything, just to keep everything kind of separate and easier to find later on once we figure out these pages. Okay, anyways, so we have div.blue hashtag box. So that's gonna be divs specifically with a class of blue and an ID of box. I'm gonna set that background color to blue. And then once I configure this once, I'm going to repeat it for the other colors. Set the background color to blue, Control S, Control C, enter Control V, enter Control V. I'm actually going to start off by making this one red. We're going to go in the same order of the HTML. So then div.green hashtag box and div.blue hashtag box. change this to those specific colors of red and green. Make sure that your CSS selector, if you've been following along with me, has both the dot class and the hashtag ID in the selector, because otherwise it won't be able to find the specific thing that you're trying to tell it to do. I'm gonna go check my output real quick, make sure that's working. Okay, sweet. Div.blue is still being a little weird. It's okay if it flexes a little bit, because here's what mine's looking like. The other media query is conflicting with my current situation, but you can see that red, green, and blue have all been established with their background colors. I'm gonna add a little bit of, let me go this over here. I'm gonna add a little bit of width and height on each of these of just 100 pixels. And we only have 3 minutes left in the Zoom, so we'll go quick on the media query part. Set the width and height to be 100 px. Okay, and then I'm gonna copy and paste that. Control C, Control V, Control V. Check my output real quick. All right, cool. So I got 3 boxes. It's gonna be weird, but that's fine. Okay, so they're displaying in a column. I need them to display in a row. Because divs are block level elements, they're always going to create a new line. Let's get out of this. They're always going to create a new line whenever they get coded into the HTML. So we need to do a media query that's going to change that. Our media type is going to be what? What kind of thing are we looking at? Screen, for real. Okay. And then we're going to add an and. And our and condition is similar to a previous one. We go to 6.1. It says when the page is narrowed to less than, which one is less than? That is max width. So that's our max width of 800 pixels. So max dash width of 800 px. No semicolon. Then a curly bracket. We're going to set the div. Let's try hashtag box, because that should affect all 3 of the boxes. Div hashtag box is our selector. It's our divs with an ID of box. We're going to set that display to be, instead of block like they're normal, we're going to set it to inline dash block, because that is going to maintain their width and height while also making them appear in a row. So if I want to, before you copy that exactly, I want to make sure that that works. It does not. Okay, so we're going to go div dot red hashtag box, and then we're going to add all 3 selectors to our query here by highlighting that. Comma, Control V, comma, Control V. We'll change this from red to green, and we'll change this from red to blue, combining multiple CSS selectors to all change them to be display inline block. So if I refresh here, why are we not working? Yes. Let's check. Min width is our starting point, so max width should be our ending point because it's 800 pixels or less. Oh, wait, it's because we're larger than 800 pixels. There we go. That'll do it. Okay, so my bad. It was working this whole time. So you can see right when we hit 800 pixels, where we shift from blue div to yellow div with our queries in there, you can see that the boxes appear from a line into a column. So your CSS, thank you. Good morning. Your CSS should look like this. On the exercise 2 style, I know that went fast, I apologize, but we have the rest of the period to make sure that those are working.
Isn't it supposed to be like a row and a column, or?
Let me check. I might have done it backwards. So, client is asking for red, green, and blue squares. We got that side by side. And when the page is narrowed to less than 800 pixels, make the squares display in a column instead. So when we're less than 800, they should be a column. Okay, I have it backwards. So these should be in a row until we hit 800 pixels, which is where they get into a column. So let me switch this around real quick. So we're going to set the display to block instead. I'm going to highlight this whole query, Control C, Enter, Control V, and set a min width here. So we have our starting point of 800 pixels. I'm going to set this to inline block, inline dash block like this. Okay. So now when we have a starting point